Hi, it's Paul Banis, GreatDad.com, and thank you very much for joining either the podcast or the YouTube version of the podcast. I'd really appreciate it if you took just a second to subscribe either on your podcast app or in YouTube. It doesn't really do anything. It's not going to send you any emails. It's just going to show up more often on your feed, and it does me a lot of good in terms of getting more exposure for this work I do to support dads. I'd also like to invite you to come to my page, GreatDad.com/go, if you'd like to discuss more about any of the issues that we are covering within the podcast, especially if there's any way I can help you to be a sounding board in your own struggles to be a dad and to be there for your family. So take a look at that. It also includes a link to my course on gratitude, where at GreatDad.com/gratitude with a offer to take that course for free. So see you in a second. Hey, it's Paul Banis with GreatDad.com, here with my weekly series talking to fathers of all types and trying to glean lessons for modern fatherhood. So welcome, everybody. And I'd like to welcome Steve Eisenblatt. Eichenblatt. I kept wanting to say Eisenblatt.
That's
Eichenblatt
okay.
to the show today to talk about his book. Welcome, Steve.
Welcome. I appreciate you having me here today, Paul.
Yeah, well, I was really intrigued by this book. First of all, this title, "Pretend They Are All Dead," is really a grabber, and I got to say, the first chapter really reels you in. And maybe we should start there, just because it is kind of a grabbing chapter. You lost your father. Your father left you, and you left the family, and you were left with your mom, and you had a sister and a brother,
Yes.
and then a gentleman came in and you wanted to take the role of dad. So
Yes.
you were stuck with that, which is awkward to begin with, and then explain this thing that happened to you after you losing your dad who left at 8 years old. At I guess 16, you had this
Right.
unbelievable experience. So
Yeah.
it's a kind of thing that could be. It's such an exciting part of it that it could almost be like the end of the story, but it comes right at the beginning, and that'd be a good way to start.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess we take what life hands us sometimes. And when you're a kid, you're just kind of rolling along, which in my situation, because my father had left and I got stuck with this, not much of a gentleman, but another father that my
Right.
mom married who adopted me. So my name changed and I took his last name, and he had 4 kids. So there's 7 of us. So, but
Would you
so
call the
we,
Jewish Brady Bunch, which I thought
yeah,
was very cute.
yeah, the Jewish Brady Bunch from hell. Um, you know, it's just back then, we're talking, in the '60s, late '60s, early '70s. You just throw the kids together, like, Okay, this will be fine. They'll figure it out." And
Yeah.
the law of the jungle is really what happens. And so there's a lot of violence and fighting in my house because of the way he acted and because of the rules that were imposed on us. But moving along, my biological father had left, dropped us off, and never came back. He was a veterinarian who lived in the same town, and he just left our lives. We didn't talk about him. We didn't ask about him. He wasn't spoken about. There was just, it was just, okay, you have a new father and a new family.
In a large
Um,
enough town that you'd never cross paths at all. You just,
it's Wayne, New Jersey. It's
yeah. Oh, yeah.
probably
Yeah.
100,000. It's a big
But
enough
it's a
town that,
megalopolis. I mean,
yeah,
Wayne melds
yeah.
into everything else.
Right, that's yeah, New Jersey. It all
Highway
kind of
9 or whatever.
rolls together. But I knew where his office was,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it was shopping center was that was close. And um, but so I never saw him. I found out later that he saw me, but that's a different part of the story.
So
So when I was
it wasn't, I guess I gleaned from the book that he had disappeared and you didn't know whether he was living, dead, in Alaska, could have been
no,
anywhere. You knew he was around, lurking somewhere in the background.
I knew he was alive, but I didn't know that
Yeah.
he wasn't allowed to see us, and
Right.
we certainly weren't allowed to see him. So we didn't. And then when I was 16, I worked at these tennis courts, and it was July 4th, and I always make this point because it's still strange to me looking back that I was there by myself,
Hmm.
sweeping the courts, because that normally is a really crowded day. And
Yeah.
I was the only one there. It was kind of one of those New Jersey roads that's heavy tree lined, so it's kind of tucked in the woods, the tennis courts. And as I was sweeping the courts, I mean, some things you just don't forget. I heard this just huge squealing tires, and then a crash, probably 20 yards from where I was, and a car had hit a telephone pole. And I was sort of freaked out because that doesn't exactly happen all the time.
Yeah,
Seeing a
right.
car crash and your heart's pounding, you don't know what to do. I'm a teenager. I ran around, the guy went through the windshield, and I went to the payphone, to try to call like the operator, because back then there wasn't 911. You just picked
It
it
wasn't
up
even
and
911.
yeah, I didn't even know what to do. Like, but I heard ambulances, I heard sirens, and there's neighbors around that obviously had come up to the scene. So I went back up there, and by the time I walked back up to where the car was, they had pulled him out of the car, and they had him leaning against the side. And I kind of like I started to turn around, and I was just going to get on my bike, my Schwinn 10-speed varsity, which was a very important part of my life because my transportation.
Right.
And I was going to get on that right away. And as I started to turn, I could just feel this. It's when you're when you're in a bar and you feel somebody like looking at you. You could just feel their presence. And I turned around, and here's this guy on the ground, and his face literally been split in two, and he uh, he had regained consciousness, and he was looking at me. And I mean, I just had this very weird feeling, and then I turned around again to leave, and the police officer pulled out his wallet, says, "Does anybody know this man?" And it was my biological father.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow.
so I got on my bike, same twin 10 speed. I rode away, and I never told anybody I was there until I was like 40 years old.
Yeah, that was the other part that I found just really amazing is how you didn't talk. You didn't feel like you could talk to anybody about it, um,
I
for
didn't, yeah, I
for a
didn't
bunch
feel
of
like I
different
could.
reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just I grew up in a house of trauma, like constant trauma. I certainly wasn't going to talk to my father who had adopted me about it,
Right.
um, and I just pushed it down. I pushed it down. I went to my buddy's house that I used to hang out with and listen to Pink Floyd and smoke pot and do whatever you do when you're a 16-year-old in New Jersey. And I just never. It's not something I talked about. And in fact. Paul, I barely thought about it. Like I didn't even think about what happened to him. I
And
really,
so you didn't even know
uh,
whether he lived or died after that. You
no,
just put it in the
I
back of
did.
your brain. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't know. I didn't know. But I assumed if he had died, I would have heard. But later on, I found out that my parents knew about this accident, and that was a whole nother part of the story.
Wow. Wow. I just can't imagine. But I can't imagine, first of all, going through that, but then also not talking about, not telling your friend, not telling, you got a sister and a brother. You didn't feel comfortable telling your mother and your stepdad. I get that. But then it didn't come up later on in therapy or anything else. I mean,
No,
it sounds like one of those really repressed trauma things that
so
somewhere in the,
yeah.
90s, 2000s, somebody would have said, you got to get some help, man.
No, I know. Well, I just didn't, I think like I mean, it's a form of PTSD, right? When you're
Yeah.
constantly getting, I mean, stuff thrown at you. There was violence in my household. I just pushed it down and just like, here's another day. And, I was a pretty shy, sort of like a shy, probably insecure kid. I didn't want to bring any attention to myself. I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time hiding, in my house from my
Try to stay
father.
away. Yeah. Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's not that I forgot about it. It's just I just pushed it down, um, and moved on. Like I became an expert in compartmentalization, and I talked to my kids about this. Like I really became an expert from a very, very early age at shutting things out that I didn't want to think about or know about.
Yeah. It's amazing the way the human brain can do that. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, that Woody Allen movie, Crimes and Misdemeanors.
Oh
That was all
yes, yeah.
about, it was about this type of compartmentalization. I mean, I have things like that in my past that are pretty dramatic. And when I finally told them to my wife and my kids, they're like, I just that I can't believe that. But those kind of things that like this, not anywhere close to your drama, but you can compartmentalize them and put them completely away and not think about them for decades.
For,
Fascinating.
yeah, no, that's right. That's exactly right. I just pushed it down and moved forward.
Yeah.
Um,
And then fast forward, you've got a family of your own. You've got four kids and four of your own kids and four biological kids and one adopted child. And I mean, how does these experiences? I mean, the accident aside, how is it affected by divorce, parental estrangement, those kind of things that are?
Yeah, I think, well, and of course I talk about this in the book, but I went through, several relationships. I had problems with intimacy, getting close, even though I was married. Both I got married twice. Both of my, well, I've been married three times, but I'm still in my third marriage, thank
Yeah,
God. And but I realized, like, during the my marriages, both of my ex-wives would say, Steve's a great guy, he's a great dad, but he's disconnected. In other words, like, I had trouble getting close to, like, intimate relationships. I didn't like to be touched. I didn't understand. I didn't grow up in a loving house, so I didn't understand what it really meant to be warm and affectionate. And so it's not even that I missed it. I just didn't understand. So when they said, "Oh, you're disconnected," I was like, I have no idea what that means. It'd be, and so I realized I needed to get therapy and so forth, and going through all that, as I had when I had kids, um, I I was probably, because I was a kid that grew up, like, looking at other people with their dads, or their big brothers playing catch or doing whatever, and I always missed that. I always felt sad that I didn't, that was one thing I
hmm
always felt sad about. And so for my kids, I wanted to make sure that, if nothing else, that I was always there for them, that they knew I loved them.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I would say, if anything, probably was too easy in some, and I was sort of a softie in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but so well, I want to be clear. Like you had troubles with connection with your partners,
Women,
but you
yes.
didn't have trouble connecting with the kids. I mean, that was, yeah,
No,
yeah,
no, I mean, the kids, I was very, like, I was really affectionate, loved the kids. I
yeah,
coached Little League. I did all those things that, I love doing. And I loved hanging out with the kids more than I liked hanging out with adults.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I watch adults fight for a living as a lawyer. So it
yeah,
was, but no, but I really had a good time with my kids. And when I got divorced, it was very difficult because, you have to make decisions. And one of the decisions I made, because I had lived through it, was that going to, I was not going to put my kids in the middle of anything. I basically just gave everything away because I did not want to be my kids to be in the situation that I had been in. I didn't want them. Look, kids are collateral damage in any
yeah,
divorce, even if it's a friendly divorce. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
and so it was important for me, for the kids to be as unaffected as possible. But and I became that dad that, I went to every single, cheerleading, sports event, play, whatever it was. I was there. Even if I didn't, even if they just saw me in the stands or whatever.
yeah,
I was there. So
yeah.
so it affected me like that.
Yeah, it seems like I don't know what the data would show, but so many people. I mean, I grew up in a single mom with a dad absent, and so my whole one of my life work is trying to promote involved parenting, but it obviously comes from this hurt and this pain that I suffered, and I don't want to see kids go through that and trying to break that cycle. Of course, there are a lot of other people who kind of repress the whole thing, or they think they did well in business or whatever because of that hard
Right.
knocks world. And I just reject that. You need the hard knocks to be able to
Yeah.
be a complete person. What's your perspective on that? Do you
Yeah.
think that it helped form you to be a successful lawyer and have a career and everything at the same time
I,
as
I think, well,
or
that's
despite?
there. Well, right. I think there's multiple levels of that question. That's a great question, because um, because I grew up in a house where I was told that I would never be anything and that I was a loser
Mm.
and
Oh,
my grades
nice.
were terrible and all those things, there was
Wow.
a voice in my head saying, okay, I'm going to spend my life proving that I'm not a
Good for
loser,
you.
is the opposite. So
Yeah.
I had that voice in my head for a long time of this person that I hated telling me I'd never amount to anything. So that definitely drove me in part to make sure that I did do more than anybody ever thought I would do. But also, I wanted to help kids. I wanted from an early age. I knew that I wanted to help people in some way. I was and so I think being formed the way I was and being in the house I was, it did make me stronger in some ways, um, and it also drove me to succeed because I didn't want my adopted father's looking at me saying, "I told you you'd never be shit." It's basically what he would tell me.
Oh,
So,
horrible. Horrible.
yeah, but I don't think you have to be hard in order to be like a good lawyer. I do think I had a lot of anger in me, um, and which is natural, and that sort of helped me in my practice because I'm a litigator.
Mhm.
Not not always the best thing, but um, but I could feel that inside.
Mhm. But you say you also want it formed you to be a want to be a protector as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, no, no, yeah, absolutely. That was one. I was always, from the time I started practicing law, I started representing kids that were put in difficult circumstances as a guardian ad
Wow.
litem, like a pro bono attorney. I've been doing that since 1987. I've represented all kinds of kids who are in the middle of either they've been sexually abused, physically abused, or they're born into drug families, or and
Yeah.
the judge appoints an independent guardian ad litem, usually a lawyer, to represent the best interests of the children and to make sure that you investigate and help decide where the kids need to be. And
Mhm.
sometimes it means they have to be away from their parents, and that's hard.
So did that come about for you organically, or did you realize in law school or undergraduate that that was something that you wanted to do because of the way you'd been raised? I mean, it's funny how these kind of things kind of work out
Yeah.
kind of subconsciously. You do something and everybody turns around and they go, "Oh my God, you're doing, exactly
Yeah.
what I thought you'd do based on
Well, yeah, I wish I could say that I was a superhero and that I always wanted to do
save
exactly
the
that from
world."
the time. Yeah,
Yeah.
save the world. But when you start, I got a job at a very nice law firm, and they did a lot of pro bono work, and is also a
Yeah.
requirement. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
my boss at the time, and I was at a big firm for Orlando, basically shoved like 3 files in my gut and said, "Go to the juvenile courthouse. You're gonna give a report on as the guardian ad litem." For him, I was basically covering for him, and I had no idea what it was. But then I realized once I got there, okay, this is about helping kids. So I got thrown into it, but it was certainly a direction I was headed in no matter what.
Yeah. Well, no judgment. I mean, when people do good things, I never question their motives. I
Oh,
mean, the fact
oh
that
yeah,
that you're doing them
yeah.
is fantastic.
Eh,
So,
eh,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, there's a lot of lawyers that just pay, they instead of doing the
Oh, they
requirements,
pay
they pay the
their
money. And
way
I'm
out of it.
always like, yeah, they pay their way out of it, and it does take a lot of time, but you get so much
Ugh,
out of it. I get so much out of it. And it's kind of the same. And I know you can appreciate this, Paul, because your father wasn't present, but when I started coaching kids, like I coached Little League and soccer, whatever it was, and I'd see these dads who wouldn't show up. They wouldn't show up, or they wouldn't be paying any attention to their kids,
yeah,
and it'd be like, you guys don't understand. You don't understand what it's like to be the kid whose parents never show up, or you're sitting there at the ball field and everybody's left, and you're waiting for a ride that never comes. And
yeah.
that's kind of pathetic, when some of those dads, but that's they'll pay for it later.
Yeah, well, sadly, unfortunately, the kids pay for it in the during that time, and then later on as well. I think I always draw a distinction between the people who have to work 2 or 3 jobs a week
Right,
just to
right.
pay for their kids, just to pay for the basic needs, but the ones who are trading off, sports car, second home, all that for time with their
Exactly.
kids. That's the thing that I really, you know, if you can afford all those things and spend time with your kids, hey, great, that's you got the dream.
Yeah,
But when you
yeah,
sacrifice time with the family, the kids lose out, and there is a point in your life probably that comes at near the end where you say, what the
yes,
hell was this
yeah.
all about?
When you're sitting there by yourself and wondering why your kids and your
What? Yeah.
grandparents aren't around, and it's because you didn't spend the time developing any kind of relationship, and one thing with my kids, like, they always knew that I was there for them even if I wasn't present because of the divorce and things like that. So that's been a blessing, and maybe that is part of going through what I went through as a kid. I realized how important that was, to be there no matter what.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, what did you learn through this about parental estrangement, if anything? Why? It's just so hard for me. My mother and father divorced they separated when I was 2, divorced when I was about 4, and my father moved to the other side of the country to be with his high school sweetheart, who was not a good stepmom.
Right.
But
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine if heaven forbid something happened between me and my wife. I can't imagine having ever thought about moving more than a mile away from my kids. I mean, they're like really a focal point for me. But did you learn anything about how your father even could have done that, or are you able to understand it or put it in a box or
Sure.
somehow
Oh
put
yeah.
some structure on it?
Well, yeah. I learned, and this goes back to the title of
Yeah,
my book,
yeah, that he
right? So
pretended.
yeah,
Yeah.
so pretend they are dead. So that in the book, and for your people who are, hopefully people will be inspired and buy it, but because I've been contacted by a lot of people who have really been helped by some of my story, because there's so many people that probably were somewhat similar in age that are walking around with these horrible stories from their childhood, but they're afraid to tell anybody. And so
Mhm.
here I am. I was this Nobody knew any of my story. Nobody knew that I could be vulnerable or emotional as I am in the book. And part of what happened was, when my biological father did die, and I found out he had died, I wound up with he was also turned out he's also a writer, and and I got thousands of pages of what he had written, journals. He wrote journals every day between 1960 and 1990, letters. I mean, thousands of pages. And he also wrote a bunch of articles that were published. And one of the articles in was the last night that he spent with us, which we didn't know was the last night, but he spent. He wrote a whole story, and it was called Hello Yellow. And there's a nice picture of a man with his back to his 3 kids, and in it he describes, acting like there was nothing wrong, acting like he was going to see us, the next day, when he wrote in a lot of detail about how his psychiatrist had said, just pretend they are dead.
His
And
psychiatrist, that was his advice.
yeah, the psychiatrist's advice was, just pretend they are dead. And excuse me, and that's apparently what he did. Is he just dropped us off and never saw us again. Um, and that was it. We were dead to him. We were dead to him. Um, and so, going back to your question, like, as far as estrangement, I mean, I call, for lack of a better term, bullshit on that. That's besides being terrible advice, which I'm not even sure that was the advice, but that's what he wrote. I think the point was, for my biological father, is life is just going to be easier without having to deal with us and my mother and child support and visitation, and he had his own problems, and so he just disappeared.
Wow. But so there's no, I guess there's no somehow reasoning about it that you can try to understand or be empathetic. Because the worst part about being deserted as a child is feeling unloved. It's even worse than somebody getting divorced and not being there, or even being there and not being as present. It's this just like abnegation of the entire the entire
But
enterprise that is so hard on a child.
yeah, you almost said it, but it's because it happened to you. It's worse. I felt like it was worse. So we were given up, and he gave us up so we could be adopted by my mother's husband. So I always say, like, it would have been better if I was just adopted at birth instead
Right.
of here. He knew me. I'm like 6 years old. I'm
Yeah,
his
right.
oldest son, and he can just drive down the street and never come back. So now later on, of course, in all of the writing, and what's kind of cool about the book is I match up, um, like my story about writing about the car crash is also later on in the book followed with his version of it. He wrote lots of detail about what happened that day and why he
Yeah.
was there.
Yep.
And also when I did, like, later on, knock on his door and show up, he wrote about what it was like to see me after all those years. So, and I learned that he tried to pretend we were dead, but he was tortured. He's absolutely tortured by it every day of his life. It ruined him. He became addicted to, prescription medications and who knows what else. And that was he died a lonely man.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow. So I guess for your own kid, I'm just still trying to process how much healing you must have had to go through then to to move
Yeah.
forward and try to have some semblance of perspective with your own children. Is there anything in there that's important to know about filial responsibility, parental responsibility, the link we have that's blood versus a link we have that's that's relationships?
Yeah, yeah, that's again excellent question. Um, one interesting thing related to that is, so there was 7 kids in our household,
Right.
and when my biological father left and this new man moved in who was very harsh and fierce, one thing that they said is, you are one family. These are your brothers and sisters. These are not your stepbrothers. These are your, and we got adopted. We're all, like, my birth certificate has my adopted father's name on it. And as much as I hated his guts, and he's dead, but I probably still hate him, or I have none, I
Right.
really don't feel that much.
That's okay.
I always felt like my brothers and sisters they're my brothers and sisters. There's no, um, they, like, we grew up in the same house. We're, even though we didn't have the same biological parents, um, they're still, regardless of blood or not, I still feel very strongly that, and I'm a loyal person. And so that, so that's one part of it. But for a biological father who lived within 2 miles of us to not uh, not have the courage to come knock on my door is it's pretty sad.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually kind of surprised that you're close to your those other non-biological siblings. I was kind of expecting you to say like you never saw them again
Yeah,
after you
yeah.
left
Well,
town.
they, the thing about it was, like, when we all had our own journeys. We all lived in the same house. So I got to say, my adoptive father, pretty much, he was a
Terrorize everyone.
terrorized everybody, you know, not just me or whatever. I mean, everybody had their own. And when I asked my sister about the book, because I sent the book to my sister before it got published, and I said, "Well, what do you think?" and all that, and she said, "I don't think you were hard enough. I think you were too easy." And I said, "Well, I was pretty hard on Richard." And she said, "Yeah, but what about all the other things that happened?" I go, "Well, that's a different journey.
Yeah,
This
different
story is
story.
about
Yeah.
me, different story and all that, but we were in it together." So,
Yeah.
you know,
One last angle I want to talk about is the shame involved with this in terms of generational trauma. Not only carries that traumatic the trauma of having lived through it, whether it was violent or sexual or all the other horrible things that can go on in a childhood, but it is also the shame of this story. I mean, I can imagine wanting to hide this from people, just pretending like he didn't ever exist at all, because who wants to
oh
tell a story
yeah,
about I was given up as at 6, my father didn't. I mean, whether people react in that way or not, for you personally, I'm sure you felt, or at least I would
uh,
have felt a lot of shame. I feel a lot of shame around whatever role I had in,
sure. Um,
in separating my
there's
parents.
yeah, well, back then, I mean, first of all, for me to be this, for my parents to be divorced initially back in the 60s. I mean, we're both
Yeah,
the
yeah,
only
yeah,
kids in school, and you went through that, and that was very confusing for all the other kids. Well, where's your dad?
yeah,
Where's
yeah.
he live and all that. And then for my mother to marry somebody else, and then my name got changed. So that was really traumatic because all of a sudden, how do you're a kid, and when your name one day is one thing and the next day is something
Mm.
else, and so I was terrified when the teacher would read the roll, because all of a sudden my last name became Eichenblatt, which nobody could pronounce. And so that always, like, oh, people would laugh and they'd look at me and they'd be like, well, I thought your name was something else, and so that was that definitely was embarrassing. And then, I buried everything inside of me so that years later, and I tell the story in the book, when I reconnected with my now wife, who had been my first girlfriend, like 20 after
Oh,
20
sweet.
25
Yeah.
years. Yeah, I started talking to her about my biological father, and she's like, What are you talking about?" I go, "Well, that wasn't my father." She's like, You never told me any of those things.
Right.
I was with you for 2 or 3 years, and you never mentioned anything
Wow.
to me,
Wow.
nothing." And she started to cry, and I go, Why are you
Oh,
crying?" She goes, "Well, because I knew you were carrying something dark inside of you, and I could never get close to you." And that was part of one of the reasons why we broke up. But I could not believe myself that I had not ever shared with her that there was this whole other life that I'd had. And I didn't even, and she was the closest person to me. So obviously I buried a lot of, this goes back to that compartmentalization, that I'm an expert in that. It's my God-given talent, was that, versus
well,
being able to throw a baseball 100 miles an hour or something.
well, it
Yeah,
is a useful skill. I mean, because a lot of people deal. I mean, people deal with
sure.
horrible traumas, and the ability to compartmentalize and not live with it every day is part of how we a lot of us survive. So that's
Oh no, absolutely, absolutely. It really,
yeah,
it definitely, it is, and it's the cat's out of the bag now. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Steve, it's really been a pleasure talking to you. The book really is a gripper once you read the first chapters, and I really it's really well written as well. It's not just the story, but it's a very well written book. I don't know what you're doing in your spare time as a lawyer, but you
yeah,
obviously picked up
yeah.
some writing chops along the way as well, and I appreciated that in looking
Yeah,
at my
well,
book.
thank you. I
Yeah,
spent
yeah.
a lot of time on it, and I had a great publisher, and I've been invited to speak at a bunch of places now, and which is nice. Um, and I've been getting a lot of, people that have gotten some help out of reading it, so that's good.
Yeah, a lot of people are carrying around some version of that trauma.
Absolutely.
All right. So again, the book is called "Pretend They Are Dead." I can block you. Can find that on Amazon, I assume, and wherever fine books
Yes,
are sold. Yeah.
right. That's it. And my website is Steven Scott Eichenblatt.com. Pretend they're dead. So not too hard to track down, because that's
All that in one URL. That's the longest URL I've ever
uh,
heard.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, with that kind of last name,
Yeah.
it's a
Right.
whole nother story.
Yeah.
I have a law firm receptionist, and it's like I have to teach them how to say my last name, but it's okay. Uh,
Great.
Well,
All
thank you,
right.
Paul.
Thank you very much for the time. Okay, Paul Bannis with GreatDad.com. You can look for my coaching offerings at GreatDad.com/go, including my free course for podcast listeners on gratitude, which is increasingly important. So everybody, until you next time, remember, a happy family starts with you.